All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Poplar Point Plan public meeting webinar kickoff. Before we formally get started with the meeting, I do want to walk through a few Zoom logistics for everyone this evening. Naomi, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Just a quick review of how to participate this evening. We will have a brief presentation followed by facilitated Q&A. If you are joining us via Zoom on computer or the phone app, you should see the option to use the Q&A box. And if you need to raise your hand to ask the question, you can do that as well. If you are joining us by phone, I do see we have one or two phone participants, you will be able to dial *9 to raise your hand, and we'll be able to unmute you or ask you to dial *6. We will go over all of this again before we start the Q&A period tonight. Also, if you need to leave early or if you know someone who could not make it this evening, this is being recorded. And so this recording, along with a copy of the presentation that's being shared, as well as all of the questions that are being posed this evening, will be posted to the project website, which my colleague Molly has put in the chat box this evening. We'll make sure we share that again with all of you later tonight. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nina Albert, Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development for the District of Columbia, to kick us off.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm incredibly excited that this day has finally come. I just, as a point of personal privilege to share a little story before we get started here. I began my career in Washington, D.C., working, over 15 years ago, working on the redevelopment of properties along the Anacostia waterfront, and to be able to have advanced the project to this point where we're able to kick off a major step and set of processes is tremendously exciting for me. So thank you all for joining. For those of you in the community who have long awaited this, to key stakeholders and partners at the National Park Service. We're also joined today by members of the Office of Planning for the District of Columbia, as well as other agencies. And we are all here because this is the official kickoff of the Poplar Point Plan process. So Poplar Point has long been awaited. It's been talked about by multiple administrations as to what it could become. And with the beautiful Frederick Douglass Bridge, it just begs to be that counterbalance and counterpoint to the yard right across the street from it, or right across the bridge. So this transformation is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to shape what I think is going to be a legacy of community connection, economic opportunity, community preservation, and conservation on the environmental side. So this planning process is a major step in redeveloping Poplar Point, and it is being grounded by the vision of the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative. And that vision included bringing economic, cultural, and recreational opportunities to both sides of the Anacostia River. This planning process, just to be clear, is also a requirement to enable the transfer of the property of the actual land at Poplar Point from the National Park Service to the District of Columbia. And once transferred, the district will then be able to, begin the redevelopment process in ways that will directly benefit local residents, and then, of course, overall the District of Columbia. By participating in this process, you who are participating on this call, as well as others who we hope will get engaged, are going to be helping us write the next chapter of this remarkable place. We want to make sure it becomes an amenity and a source of inspiration for generations to come. The district and the National Park Service have committed a dedicated team and resources to work with the community to shape the future of this important waterfront property. And at its core, the future of Poplar Point is about creating a vibrant, inclusive space where the community, the environment, and development can coexist harmoniously. These goals reflect the district's focus on community-centered growth and MPS's commitment to resource conservation. So I invite you to stay engaged not only in this meeting, but throughout the whole process to share your vision as an individual, as a resident, as a city resident, as a business potentially, as an environmentalist, whatever viewpoint that you come to this conversation with, please stay engaged, please participate, please share your ideas. And in doing so, you will help create the future for Poplar Point. With that, I'm excited to turn over the meeting to Tammy Stidham, who is the Associate Regional Director for Lands and Planning in the National Capital Region for the National Park Service. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you, Nina. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tammy Stidham, and I am the Associate Regional Director for Lands and Planning in the National Capital Region at the National Park Service. I am the lead at the National Park Service for the redevelopment of Poplar Point, which is a portion of Anacostia Park under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. We are very excited to partner with the district and the community to shape the future of Poplar Point. This effort represents an incredible opportunity to create new spaces for recreation, cultural enrichment, and connecting to the Anacostia River. By working together, we can ensure Poplar Point becomes a vibrant hub that supports the district's goals for equitable development, community engagement, and sustainable growth. The National Park Service is leading the federal portion of the Poplar Point Plan. Our role is to oversee the process and collaborate with the district to advance a plan that meets the needs and goals of the community, while also ensuring the process is in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as NEPA, as well as the legislation that requires the transfer to occur, both of which we will be going over more in tonight's presentation. Again, we are very excited to be kicking off this process and look forward to working with all of you over the coming months. And to reiterate what Nina Albert said, this is an important process for you to participate, and we look forward to your participation. With that, I now turn it over to Whit Smith, sorry, with DIMPAD. Whit.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Whit Smith with the Deputy Mayor's Office for Planning and Economic Development. I am the project manager and project lead on the Poplar Point Plan. Welcome to our kickoff. We are thrilled to be here with you and to start this important process. The Poplar Point Plan is a partnership between the District of Columbia and the National Park Service. Tonight is the launch of the Joint Environmental Assessment, EA, and Master Plan, a component of the Poplar Point Plan. The environmental assessment is required to facilitate the transfer of the Poplar Point site from the National Park Service to the district. Through this process, MPS and the district will evaluate how different development ideas might affect wildlife, water quality, air, and other environmental factors. This ensures the plan aligns with the sustainability goals and federal environmental laws. The master plan is a detailed plan that will show how it will look like and how it will be used in the future. It considers things like where buildings, parks, roads, and other features will go. It also helps to ensure the redevelopment meets the needs and priorities of the community, preserves and provides access to important natural areas, and aligns with the long-term goals. The Office of Planning is leading the master plan portion of the work through the leadership of Heba El Gawish, Associate Director of Neighborhood Planning, Rita Abu Samra, Poplar Point Project Manager, Diamond Thompson Smith, Deputy Project Manager. DEMPA will also closely collaborate with teams at the Department of Energy and Environment, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Parks and Recreation. Tonight's presentation is intended to be a kickoff of this process. Excuse me. In a moment, I will introduce members of the consulting team that is supporting this effort. They will lead us through a presentation that touches on the following. Background about the site, the planning process and requirements we must comply with, a detailed description of Poplar Point's existing conditions and our approach to planning at the site, specific compliance measures to be sure we align with national environment Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, requirements, and the district's planning process. As Latoya mentioned at the top of the call, we will leave time for questions and comments at the end of the presentation. Your input on this process is critical. Our goal is to make the planning process accessible and transparent and to engage the residents of the surrounding community, seeking a wide range of voices, perspectives, and interests. And we will actively seek feedback through multiple digital, written, and in-person platforms. We seek to hear underrepresented voices in this project. As the Deputy Mayor and Tammy noted, the transformation of Poplar Point is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We are excited to have you engaged in this process. We see this meeting as a level set meeting to introduce the community to the team that will be leading the efforts at the district and MPS, provide background about the project, understand historical context about the project, review existing conditions at the site, and establish guiding principles for our work. We will share a project timeline and explain how you can provide input and stay closely involved in this process. Joining us tonight to lead the presentation is the consulting team that will be supporting this efforts on behalf of the district and MPS. Stan Wall with HRNA Advisors, Alan Harwood and Claire Sale with AECOM are the planners and economic development experts leading this effort. You already met Latoya Thomas and Brick and Story, a DC community engagement firm that is leading the community engagement efforts for this process. Thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to collaborating with you on this planning process. I will now turn it over to Stan and the consulting team to lead the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Whit, and good evening, everyone. I am Stan Wall, Managing Partner of HRNA Advisors, Washington, D.C. office, along with our partner firm AECOM, and with the support of Brick and Story, we are serving as DEMPED's owner's representative in advancing the Poplar Point Plan. I've had the opportunity to work in Ward 8 on multiple occasions over the years, with one of my first projects in the community being supporting the environmental impact statement for the St. Elizabeth West Campus over 20 years ago. And very meaningfully, I had the opportunity to work on the early stages of Poplar Point planning 15 years ago with my colleague Alan Harwood, who you'll hear from shortly. I am extremely excited to be part of this effort again and to help advance the project toward implementation and to do so in a manner that meets the requirements of the land transfer and very critically, that responds to the needs and wants of the community. I'll kick us off by walking through the project background and requirements. Poplar Point is located in Ward 8 along the Anacostia River. The property extends approximately 1 mile from the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge to the 11th Street Bridge. The site consists of 110 acres separated from historic Anacostia by Interstate 295. The areas in blue text on this map, the Wharf, Buzzard Point, Navy Yard, and others, indicate projects that have been initiated as part of the AWI Framework Plan, and Poplar Point is part of that broader AWI vision. The purpose of this project is to facilitate conveyance of the land from the federal government to the District of Columbia and to implement a land use plan for Poplar Point. It is needed because the DC Lands Act passed in 2006 requires that the National Park Service transfer the property with the goals of improving and developing Poplar Point into community amenity by providing a publicly accessible waterfront park with cultural, economic, and recreational attractions and activities, to spur revitalization efforts east of the Anacostia River by providing a mix of residential, retail, and office uses across Metro's Anacostia Station, and finally, to improve access to and expand recreational amenities within the southern portion of Anacostia Park. Since the DC Lands Act was passed, the district began developing a land use plan for Poplar Point in 2008. However, site and market conditions have changed over that time. Tonight, the district is kicking off a new land use planning process for Poplar Point. As part of the land transfer, the legislation requires that there must be at least 70 acres of land reserved for park purposes. We must identify and relocate the existing National Park Service facilities that are currently on the site. We must include at least 2 areas within the site for potential commemorative works, and we must be consistent with the AWI plan, the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative Plan, to the greatest extent practicable. There are currently 3 national parks, The requirement for the reservation of 70 acres of land for park purposes ensures that more than half of Poplar Point will have designated parks and outdoor space, again, responsive to the needs and wants of the community. There are currently 3 National Park Service facilities on the site, including the U.S. Park Police Anacostia Operation Facility, the Park Police Anacostia Aviation Facility, and the National Capital Parks East headquarters. In order to proceed with the planning process for Poplar Point, all of these facilities must be relocated off-site. Sites for potential memorials in Poplar Point must also be identified as part of the land use plan. Views and sightlines will be considered when determining the locations for these memorials. Lastly, there is a requirement for this plan to be consistent with the Anacostia Waterfront Initiative Framework Plan as best as possible. This includes considering key themes from the plan, such as environment, transportation, parks, destinations, and neighborhoods. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alan Harwood, to walk through the site description and planning overview.
Thank you, Stan. My name is Alan Harwood. I'm a principal and urban planner with AECOM, who's deeply invested in the future of Poplar Point. From my previous work on the site with Stan, and from my more recent role in the urban design of the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge. So now we're going to summarize the history and existing conditions of Poplar Point, review some previous plans, and talk about what these considerations mean moving forward. Poplar Point was named for the poplar trees that lined Howard Road, as shown in this old 1833 painting. And you can see that Washington was not yet an established city. And the U.S. Capitol building, which is still a direct view down New Jersey Avenue from the site, was still under construction. So to understand Poplar Point as a site, we looked at its evolution over time. Most of Poplar was originally covered by the Anacostia River. This is sometimes known as submerged land. But the historic shoreline of Poplar Point is marked in the new Oval Park. If you know the interior design of the Oval shows where that historic alignment is. By the 1920s, the river had been dredged and the marsh area had been filled to create about 110 acres of land along the Anacostia River. It was lined with a stacked stone seawall, and this is the shoreline configuration that we see today. A naval receiving station was built in 1943, and the eastern part of the site was used by the Navy throughout the 1940s. Construction on the original South Capitol Street Bridge began in 1945. You can see that it's kind of the pilot's getting started there. The western part of the site was used by the District Department of Public Works as a nursery for street trees, and the architect of the Capitol had greenhouses to grow flowers for Congress. By the 1980s, the National Park Service occupied the Navy facilities, and in this image, much of Poplar Point is a construction site for Metro. The WMATA built the Green Line Tunnel under the river and through the site, the Anacostia Metro Rail Station, which extends under 295, and a parking garage because it was originally the terminus of the Green Line. Today, the Park Service continues to occupy those former neighborhood facilities, the facilities that are currently there, the National Capital East, the U.S. Park Police, and the Park Police Aviation Facility, which Stan mentioned. And the former nurseries that were abandoned in the 1990s and wooded areas around them have emerged in the western portion of the site. So to fully understand the existing conditions of the site, we examined a range of natural and man-made considerations. Because the site is so complex, we'll summarize each layer of these considerations individually and then look at the layers combined. The elevated water table and the abandoned former nurseries have created scattered pockets of wetlands on the site. Some of these are constrained by utility lines, some of them are contaminated, which are being cleaned up, and some of which are thriving with great ecological benefit. Given its marshy origin and its proximity to the river, the site is almost completely within 100 and 500-year floodplains. There's an earthen levee protecting the point and a man-made levee protecting the MPS facilities. Elevations at Poplar Point generally range from about 2 to 31 feet above sea level. But most of it is extremely low lying. It's much lower than the surrounding area. But as you can see by all the topography, the topo lines, the site is not flat. In terms of infrastructure, there are a lot of facilities and urban systems located throughout Poplar Point. The 3 Park Service buildings that we talked about. There's also a small 1908 pump house on the shoreline and many underground utilities, including the WMATA Metro Tunnel, Stickfoot Branch storm drain and outfall, and a variety of regional water and sewer lines, and other pipes and tunnels. Poplar Point is accessible in a number of ways. The primary points of access of entry for vehicles are Marionberry Avenue, which used to be known as Good Hope Road, Howard Road, and Anacostia Drive from the new oval next to the bridge. Additional access for vehicles occurs at either end of Anacostia Drive, including from Nicholson Street and through the Joint Base Anacostia Boulevard. Bicyclists and pedestrians can reach Poplar Point from all of these roadways, but also from the expanded Anacostia Riverwalk Trail and the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge, as well as the Anacostia Park pedestrian overpass. As large as a site that it is, the majority of Poplar Point is not currently accessible to the public. The Park Service facilities, storage areas, and training fields are restricted areas. And the most notable part of the site is the wooded area, which is fenced off for public safety due to that contamination that is being cleaned up. Only the western end near Frederick Douglass Bridge and the eastern end near Marionberry Avenue are fully available for public use, which are shown in green on this map. Like Anacostia, Poplar Point is known for its wonderful views to and from central Washington. Some of those important vistas include Howard Road toward the Washington Monument, W Street towards the Washington Monument, and the extension of New Jersey Avenue from the U.S. Capitol, which allows direct views of the Capitol building. So combining the layers that we just discussed illustrates the complexity of the site. Unfortunately, Poplar Point is a large site with the capacity for both open space and development. At 110 acres, Poplar Point is larger than Oxford Run Park, that's in the southern part of Ward 8. Poplar is also larger than the developed East Campus area of St. Elizabeth's, just for a sense of scale there. To help us address the complexity and size of the site, we looked at the previous planning efforts to identify the best ideas from the past, ideas that have been developed in coordination with the community. And modern planning for Poplar Point began under Mayor Williams' administration with the foundational Anacostia Waterfront Initiative. This transformative AWI changed the perception of the Anacostia River from something that was seen as the edge of Washington to something that was centrally important to both sides of the river. And note that in this plan, it suggested allowing the river into the central portion of the site, where most of the wetlands are generally located today. Some of you may recall that the district government and the National Park Service started a planning process about 15 years ago. That effort occurred before the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge was built. And if you note that this old plan had a circle instead of an oval, and the angle of the bridge alignment was a straight extension of Suitland Parkway. More recently, some of you may have seen the plans on the left that were part of the context for the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge. And the oval, which replaced the circle, and the revised bridge alignment immediately adjacent to the old bridge created a curving extension of Suitland Parkway. In addition, some of you may have seen the community-driven plan on the right, and that really identified the protection and preservation of wetlands on the western side of the site and development on the eastern side. But in general terms, our approach to planning for this planning process is to build on the analysis of existing conditions, addressing those identified constraints. We want to incorporate the ideas from the previous planning efforts by borrowing those best elements. We want to identify some general planning principles to guide the next steps in the process. And you'll notice when we go through that some of the language is borrowed from the AWI plan. So the first planning principle is to expand the wetlands. We want to protect and enhance the ecological function of the critical natural areas. We want to connect and consolidate the wetlands to protect habitat. We want a daylight stickfoot branch as a surface water feature. The second planning principle is to celebrate the point. We want to emphasize the civic importance and symbolic beauty of this landscape, and is the setting for the Frederick Douglass Bridge, and as a gateway to the Anacostia River. Allow for a special anchor to take advantage of its prominence and visibility. The third planning principle is to rediscover the shoreline. We want to create a signature waterfront with a variety of special features and activities to serve as a place of arrival, and establish both a unique destination for existing residents of Anacostia and a water taxi stop connected with other waterfront destinations. The fourth planning principle is to build upon the adjacent projects. We want to link the Frederick Douglass Bridge Esplanade and the 11th Street Bridge Park with intermodal routes, and we want to continue the bridge district development to connect with the context of Poplar Point and complement the uses of all of these, open space and development. The fifth planning principle is to focus on metro rail access. We want to concentrate the highest density around the metro station to take advantage of this public infrastructure investment. We want to transit access on the site is really a huge advantage for Poplar Point. The sixth planning principle is to connect with the Anacostia community. We want to extend the surrounding communities and commercial corridors into the eastern portion of the site and to the waterfront, provide a direct access to Poplar for existing residents. The seventh planning principle is to establish a primary corridor to connect the metro station development with a waterfront along a north-south roadway to serve as a central spine for the site. This is the appropriate location for street level activity. So taken together, the planning principles that guide us as we proceed are attempting to balance a variety of needs. And that's protect the natural resources, to elevate cultural assets, provide recreational activities, and meet housing and economic development goals. And it's the balance of those needs that we're really going to be trying to zone in on. So there's a couple of things that we want you to think about now or before our next meeting. And this is really, what about these planning principles really stands out or is most important to you? What is missing from some of these planning principles? So give that a good consideration, and we would love to hear from you. So those planning principles are going to be translated into alternatives. We're required to consider 3 build alternatives and a no action alternative. The alternatives will all provide 70 acres of open space for park purposes, accommodate development, and address wetlands in one of the 3 ways. Either preserve all the wetlands, preserve forested wetlands, or mitigate the wetlands. The alternatives must also include a relocation site for the Park Service facilities, as Stan mentioned. Consider adjacent parcels if there's some spillover development, and recognize areas that are already designated for park purposes, such as 11th Street Bridge Park. So these alternative plans will be subject to a rigorous compliance process that my colleague Claire Sale will address.
Thank you, Alan. My name is Claire Sale. I'm an Associate Principal and Environmental Planner with AECOM. When talking about the NEPA process and this planning effort, there are 2 lead agencies and 2 cooperating agencies, all of which play a key and important role in this effort. The lead federal agency is the National Park Service, and the lead District of Columbia agency is the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development. The National Capital Planning Commission is the federal cooperating agency, and the District of Columbia Office of Planning is also a cooperating agency. So you've heard NEPA mentioned a couple of times already. So what is it? It is the National Environmental Policy Act. And the intent of the National Environmental Policy Act is to provide information to decision makers about the potential environmental impacts of projects and proposed actions. It informs decision making. So as part of this effort, the NEPA process looks at what are the alternatives for the action. It evaluates the environmental impacts of that action and then identifies mitigation measures. So what can be done to make the impacts less? These are documented through an environmental review process, and that can include an environmental assessment, which evaluates the alternatives and then determines whether or not there is a significant impact. In the case there is no significant impact, a finding of no significant impact, frequently referred to as a FONSI, is released. If it is determined that there would be a significant impact, and another layer of environmental review is required, called an environmental impact statement, which would be concluded with a record of decision. At the same time, we are looking at the NEPA environmental compliance process. We're also looking at Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. This act establishes a framework by which historic resources can be protected. The goal is to minimize, avoid, or mitigate harm to historic properties. And similar to NEPA, we look at what are the project alternatives, what are the potential for adverse effects on historic properties, and then we look at ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate those effects. As we do this, this is concluded in a determination of no adverse effect if no historic properties would be adversely affected, or if that would be the case, there would be a memorandum of agreement or a programmatic agreement that would be signed. And this would document the mitigation measures required for the project. And so you can see here that there's a lot going on with the planning process. So the green bar at the top indicates the overall plan process. So we're here at the beginning at the kickoff meeting. So we are here to provide project background information and just in general introduce the project. We also have the NEPA process, which is in the blue, and the red process underneath that is the Section 106 process. And the key thing here is that they're working in tandem. So while the master plan process at the top, which is a series of those green boxes, is underway. There's also the regulatory process for environmental and historic preservation reviews that are working at the same time. So one of the first steps for the planning process would be to develop some initial alternatives. And we would, as part of that effort, come back to the public and have a public meeting for opportunity for public input. And this was also serve for the NEPA and Section 106 processes. We would expect that to happen later this spring. So we would take that information that we understand at the public meeting, go back, refine some of those alternatives, and then return to you, the public, for an opportunity to look at a preferred alternative and see if there's anything that we need to change. As part of that, we are also looking at the environmental impacts of the alternatives, as well as the impacts and effects on historic resources. We would anticipate then that would go on through the spring, and we would document those impacts and effects with the anticipation of an environmental assessment release in the summertime. Once that has been available for public comment and review for 30 days, we would anticipate a decision to be made whether or not that would be a finding of no significant impact, a FONSI, or if it's determined that there would be a significant impact, further documentation would be required. Similarly, for the memorandum of agreement, programmatic agreement, if needed, to mitigate adverse effects on historic properties. And again, we would anticipate that in the late summertime timeframe. Once those documents have been completed, we would move forward with a more detailed master plan. And that would occur in fall and winter for public meetings. But all of these things work together as we look at alternatives, refine them, and it's an iterative process. And with that, I will turn it to Latoya Thomas from Brick and Story.
Thank you, Claire. So I'd like to take a moment to just walk folks through our engagement process for the Poplar Point Plan. As Claire noted, there's a lot of different steps in this process, and our goal is to make sure that we are engaging the community, and the community is incredibly diverse. And so thinking about how to engage in meaningful ways and create multiple pathways to this process. As Claire noted, there are a number of milestone points. And as you can see on the screen, we have a number of public meetings, including tonight's being the kickoff, scheduled over the course of the next year. These various milestone points will take us through kickoff, review of existing conditions, development of the land use plan alternatives, the development of a preferred alternative, and the master plan process. In between all of these milestone events, though, there are going to be a variety of engagement activities and events for the community to participate in. So there'll be a mix of webinars, open houses and workshops, walking tours of the site, different pop-ups, focus groups, and surveys. Our goal here, again, is to create numerous pathways for the broader community to be able to engage in this process, while also ensuring that folks who are in close proximity to the site, as well as populations who might be historically underengaged, have an opportunity to engage in this process in a meaningful way. As a reminder, we also have the project website set up on public input. That is in the chat box. We'll add it again throughout the meeting tonight. But we're going to continue to provide updates on the process, as well as the calendar of different engagement activities and events, so that you can know and decide how best to engage in this process. So with that, we are going to move into our facilitated Q&A portion. Before we do that, I want to walk through the Zoom logistics again, particularly for anyone who may have joined us late. We do have a Q&A box as part of Zoom. So if you look at the bottom of your menu bar, you can type in your questions into the Q&A box. We will tee them up from there. I do know that there are some questions that have come in through the chat box, so I'm going to try to field those questions as well, but I'm going to encourage everyone who is using Zoom app or Zoom on their computer to direct your questions to the Q&A box. If you are joining us by phone, I know we may have a few phone attendees, you are able to dial *9 to raise your hand, and we can unmute you from there or prompt you to dial *6. So again, if you're joining us by phone, you won't have access to a chat box or to the Q&A box, but you can raise your hand by dialing *9. Again, if you need to leave tonight's presentation early, this is being recorded. A copy of the recording, the actual slide deck, and the questions that are posed this evening will be available on the project website after tonight's meeting. So with that, we're going to go ahead and stop sharing the presentation and start walking through the questions that we've received so far. And again, please continue to put questions in the Q&A box or raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the Q&A box, and I will go back and also field some of the ones that I see in the chat box that have not been captured. First question is Therma US still in consideration for building here?
Thanks for that question. So as you know, Therma has done, a number of outreach programs over the last couple of years with the interest and intention of trying to open a facility within DC. At this point, we are, not considering them a part of this process. There is, and also, as you know, there was an RFEI, and that's an ongoing process. So, we will likely have to revisit this, but at this point, there's no participation.
I'm going to go to the chat box. What I'm going to do is actually Q&A chat box and then hand raise. So Jamila, White, I see your hand up, so hang tight one moment. In the chat box, we have a question. Will there be a trash and litter education program in schools to educate the community about respecting and maintaining the park?
That's another great question. So, a lot of these items are needs for the neighborhood that we're hoping to, through this process, determine, what can be and how they can be implemented. So again, this is something that, from meetings like this and comments that we receive, we'll build a database and start to work through our different agencies. And as we're doing our planning, to incorporate where we can. This will also, there will be opportunity through the process for comment, but also through your ANC and various other community organizations to provide comments. So I think that's a great, idea. I think it's much needed, and it's something we'll consider.
All right, I'm going to go to our hand raise. And Jamila, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, Latoya. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for the presentation tonight. Just wanted to know if you, when is that community engagement process? Is there a timeline? I didn't see that if there was for engaging the community, and how you all are going to be reaching out to ANC commissioners, especially those in Ward 8, and how you're going to do more like word of mouth, door-to-door engagement. As you know, Latoya, a lot of people in our community are not online. They're on social media, but not necessarily this type of social media. And the typical, we send a flyer out, we had a town hall, it doesn't cut it, right? You don't really get the voices. It's more people who have more access and privilege, like myself, that can come out and participate, but not people whose voices are really not included in so much of the town halls and meetings that happen. They don't really find out until after it's happened. So I was wondering if you could really talk a little bit more about your community engagement in terms of really reaching particularly Ward 8 and 8A residents. That's my jurisdiction. And then if you could share the RFI in the chat, I just want to, or send us a link to where it's posted. I just wanted to take a look at it that you mentioned earlier, because Therma came to our ANC twice looking for support for this project.
What do you want to start with the community engagement, or would you like me to take that one?
I'll let you take that, but I'll start with the
yeah,
last part about the RFEI. Happy to post that to our site. It is currently posted and searchable, but we'll have that link available for you guys.
And then with regards to community engagement, so we'll have community engagement going on throughout actually the entire year. There's going to be a mix of engagement activities. The bulk of those are actually going to be in-person activities. So I'll just speak to activities first and then talk about outreach. With respect to the activities, we're going to have a range of activities, a number of different workshops and open houses that will be in person. There will be virtual components of that for folks who can't make those. There will be at least one walking tour or walk shop, as we call it. And we think that will actually be a great opportunity to get the community to the site in a facilitated, guided way. We're also going to be doing a number of different pop-ups and also looking to do a site activation later in the fall. We're still working through dates as a team, And so that's what will be getting posted over the next several weeks. Additionally, just in terms of outreach, there's a couple of different methods that we are working with the various agencies and the consultant team on. There is a pretty robust contact list that DEMPED and the Office of Planning have built up. And I know they're also working with NPS because NPS has a stakeholder list as well around which information is being communicated. We've also talked with OP and DEMPED about doing ANC briefings in some capacity. And so we're still developing the framework for what that looks like. But that would be specifically to target the ANCs to make sure that you all are not just aware, but also have information well ahead of schedule and also know how to invite people out. And then where needed, we will also do some very direct outreach. So that's where some of our pop-ups, particularly being able to pop up in specific neighborhoods or specific sites where we can personally invite people to the process and also bring some of that engagement activity to the community will come in handy. And if anyone else from the Office of Planning or DEMPED wants to chime in there, please feel free. Okay. Jamila, does that answer your question?
Yes, I was just sending you a chat in the chat about some thoughts. So thank you for your feedback. I'll finish putting in the chat.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Jamila. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Q&A box. Give me one moment. Who will spearhead the process for community benefits agreements, and how can we ensure the school communities, including DCPS and charter, closest to this area are recipients?
Yeah, I think that sort of ties into LaToya, your comments just about engagement overall. However, the community benefits agreement typically is something that is between the community and a developer. Once we go through the process of the EA, the master plan, zoning, transfer, and then we start to dispose of the parcels within that plan, that's where there would be the opportunity to start that conversation. So it's something that's in mind, but again, through this process, the different organizations, community members have the opportunity of providing input, comments, requests that we will utilize to develop our plan. So I encourage everyone to do that.
All right, I'm going to go back to the chat box. One moment. And I'm going to go in order. I'm going to actually do two quick clarification questions in the chat box. There was a question regarding the spelling of the link. The link is correct. It is Poplar Point, not popular. So just so there's no confusion there. There was also a question that I want to find that someone asked about the inclusion of housing. Will housing be considered as part of the planning process as a use?
Yeah, thank you. That's another great question. I think everyone's curious about what will be on site. And I think that's really part of this process. It's for us to determine collectively what best fits in this neighborhood, best serves the community. And that's really what we're working towards. So it's not something that I can answer now, but it's something that I'm hopeful you'll provide your input, and we'll continue to develop this plan with that insight. So just again, it's everything is on the table, but again, it has to serve the community.
All right, I'm going to go back to the Q&A box. Given the significant complexity of the site and the importance of getting this right this one time to do so, why has only an EA been chosen instead of a full EIS?
I think the best way to answer. Oh, I'm sorry, Tammy.
No, go ahead, Whit. Go ahead.
I was going to say the best way really to answer, I think this is first to best understand the EA and how that fits into the overall EIS process. And then Tammy, it would be great if you can, provide sort of, a heads up on the work that's been completed and why an EA is our method at this point.
So typically you would prepare an environmental impact statement or EIS if you knew at the beginning of the proposal that the proposal you're considering has adverse environmental impacts. And in this case, we've done so much work in advance of this planning effort, re-kicking this off, that we are pretty sure that we can complete the work using an EA and avoid significant environmental impacts that would throw us into an EIS. If we did find ourselves in that situation, we would reevaluate that decision.
I'm gonna go back to the chat box. Bear with me one moment. What agreements has this district entered into relating to Poplar Point, including any agreements relating to the relocation of the heliport pad? I'm also curious if DC has preliminary cost estimates for relocation of the federal facilities.
Number of questions. Let's see if I can answer them all, but Latoya, you might have to remind me as I get through it.
Yep.
So no agreements at this point have been entered into for the relocation. We are exploring a number of options, and we'll continue to do so. The question about cost estimates, there were some estimates completed many years ago. We have looked at them, escalated them. However, we're also looking to update a program with the Park Service, and that is informing those numbers. So we are still working through that. We don't have anything finalized, but we are looking at numbers.
Okay, I'm going back to the Q&A box. How many companies have had the opportunity to vet this location and draft proposals for development before this meeting?
I think that's probably tied into the request for expressions of interest. So I'm gonna just lean on the previous answer. It can be made available for everyone to review, but it's an ongoing process.
Okay, next question. Given Poplar Point's role in civil rights history, home to one of the first integrated public pools in DC, how can this development honor that legacy by ensuring access to inclusive wellness spaces and cultural anchors that support aging residents and community connections? Just a related question, if the groups like the Anacostia Community Museum been engaged to highlight and capture the importance of the history of the park?
That is a great question, comment. It's very important as just an underlying principle for this project of making sure it's equitable, and racial equity is sort of in the DNA of this project. As it refers to, as you refer to different uses of the site and Anacostia Park generally, I think there is a lot of rich history there, and that is something that we're considering in both the memorial sites and beyond the federal memorial sites, within whatever other sites that we are calling out that history. So it is our intent, again, to serve the community, but also to honor the legacy of this site. So that is something that will be top of mind through our planning process. But again, I encourage everyone to continue to provide input similar to that, so that we can be aware, continue to push, and try to incorporate what's necessary, again, to honor the site and the park.
Yeah, going back to the Q&A box. Are there plans to include pet waste stations? We don't have any on this side of the Riverwalk. Navy Yard and Buzzard Point have them.
Did you say pet waste?
Pet waste stations.
Okay, so similar to pet waste, pet parks. That's actually something that my colleagues at the Office of Planning probably could provide some input in terms of design requirements that they'll be sort of digging into. So I'll pause and see if any of the three, Rita, maybe you can just give a quick blurb.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Whit. So at this stage, we haven't really gotten into this amount of detail, but it is helpful to hear that this is something that the community is interested in, and we will definitely factor that in when we're looking at open space.
Give me a moment. I'm going to go back to the chat box. There's a question regarding why, given the importance of Poplar Point to the health of the Anacostia River, DOEE is not a lead agency in this process.
There is a reference slide to the agencies that are partnering on this project, and I think it would be not correct to say that they are not a very important part. DOE is leading the CERCLA process. They are also very involved in various alternatives and development of alternatives as we start to, look at how the site will develop. In addition, they will be very much involved. So they are an extremely important agency to be involved, as are the parks DPR and DDOT. So you're likely going to see that involvement ramp up as we start to ramp up the process.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the Q&A box. I do want to quickly just acknowledge some of the comments that have come in. So thank you for your comments. There was a comment around in addition to recreation, that an effort will be made to protect the natural wildlife, including the wild turkeys. Thank you for folks who noted in the chat box regarding the different organizations. HABA is an example that was listed here, as well as locations in Ward 8 where we can leverage some of our engagement tools. So again, thank you for flagging that. Also a flag, Anacostia is the only arts and culture district in DC, and so the site should fit in that. Let me go back to the Q&A box and then come back to the chat. Question in the Q&A, will Poplar Point be rezoned through this land use process?
Yes. I probably should provide a little bit more detail, but yes, that is the intent, is to, has been described, going through the environmental assessment process, and then a master plan process that will inform the zoning.
I can add a little more detail to that, Whit, if you want. So as part of the master plan section, which will, I guess in the beginning when Whit was introducing the project, he mentioned that this is a two processes in one, basically the EA and the master plan. As part of the master plan process, we will be including development framework and design guidelines portion that will inform a rezoning process. Just basically the first step of it.
Thanks, Mina. Back to the chat box. Are artists being engaged from the conception of this project, and that includes environmental artists?
When we say environmental artists, are we talking landscape architects, or are we talking about people focused on more environmentally focused art? Probably shouldn't answer a question with a question. So I'll do my best. Again, the intent here is for us to—
The latter, Whit.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So the answer then is really to utilize the community as sort of a resource to identify what would be needed, wanted here. This is a very important piece of Anacostia, and we intend to sort of bring the arts walk and that focus into the site. So there will likely be a significant amount of engagement there. In terms of whom and when, I think that's, again, part of the process and part of what we're hoping to lean on the community for as well.
I'm going to go back to the Q&A box. And again, I want to also acknowledge, if you provide any contact information in the chat box, we do have that. And we will make sure emails are also included and or updated with what we have in our database. So thank you. Back to the Q&A box. What expected level of flooding are you using to determine where on the site can be safely developed? How high above current mean higher high water, and by when in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. But again, I think going through this process, that's something that we're studying, and something that we'll probably be able to provide, more information about where development will occur and how we'll mitigate any sort of flooding. There are also certain district-wide requirements that we are aware of and will follow as we start to move through these development alternatives.
Okay, we had a comment in the Q&A box. Space is perfect for a river nature center and or Discovery Science Center for children in the DMV. Another question regarding Therma. Is Therma being considered for other locations in DC?
That's hard for me to answer. This isn't really site specific. So I would say as we learn, we will provide that information to you.
Next question, roughly speaking, what is the square feet of development and height of desired development in the project area?
That's all part of the process that we're determining now. So, as we go through a land use plan, Alan and Claire can provide some detail, but we're looking more at developable parcels. As we start to refine that plan, that's when we start to think about what amount of density we can provide as we move into Rita's territory with the planning process. That's where we get a better sense of what it will look like, height, step backs. And probably at that point, we'll have some understanding or sense. So it's not a question that I can answer now, but it's a question that we will be able to answer later.
I'm going to keep with the Q&A box for a moment just to catch up on a few of these questions. We have a comment. I'd like to recommend lighting and safety as a design principle and community need for Poplar Point and the surrounding area. A question, can there be different development levels considered for Poplar Point alternatives in the EA rather than just having the tallest and highest building?
Yes, again, it's part of the process. I'm excited that everyone has comments of what they'd like to see, and I think that's really the reaction that we're hoping for as we start to work through these alternatives, where some may want a lot of density, others may not. I think it's something that we're going to have to find that balance and continue to sort of refine. So again, thank you for that comment, and we'll continue to take in more comments as we guide the plan forward.
At what point and how will you brief the community through the ANCs and other community organizations? Southwest and Buzzard Point will be extremely interested.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Sure, sorry. At what point and how will you brief the community through the ANCs and other community organizations? Southwest and Buzzard Point will be extremely interested.
Yeah, I think this goes into what you mentioned earlier, Latoya, in terms of providing briefings, and we're still working out that strategy. But our intent is to engage in the most effective way, and provide opportunity for comment and opportunity to ask any questions.
What types of analysis will be conducted specifically to determine environmental impact? And will any housing development on the site have to comply with district law requiring 30% affordable units on public land?
Yeah, so the latter 10801, I think, is what was referenced in terms of the affordability level. And if a parcel is later determined to be multifamily as it's disposed, that is a consideration, so requirement. What was the first part of that question? Excuse me.
The first part was what types of analysis will be conducted specifically to determine environmental impact?
Yeah, so the CERCLA process, I would sort of defer to my DOE colleagues here, but essentially that is reviewing the site's the impacts of the environment and previous uses with the intent of better understanding the impact, better understanding how it should be addressed, remediated. And that is one phase or one step. And then, of course, as the parcels are redeveloped much later down the line, there are requirements to have environmental studies completed and various remediation completed at that point as well.
Okay, I'm going to keep going in the Q&A box, then I'll come back to the chat. So for folks who are putting questions in the chat, I do see them. Will the relocation of the NPS facilities, especially the Park Police helicopter, be considered in the NEPA 106 processes? If not, how will this be handled?
Yeah, Tammy, do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to?
I can answer. The U.S. Park Police facilities, as well as the park headquarters, their location and their build out are all going to be included as part of the EA. And 106.
Thank you, Tammy. Since this entire site is in the 100 and 500 year floodplains, will this limit the amount or intensity of development on the site?
There will definitely be impact on the site, in terms of where there is less requirements to mitigate flooding, and where there would be more. Again, this is a process that we are using to determine where there is significant flooding and how it will be addressed. But as mentioned previously, there are requirements, and for these parcels to be developable, we have to meet those requirements.
Okay, there's a question. If you'll be seeking changes to the future land use map for this project during the upcoming comp plan process.
That's a good question. I think that that's something we'll have to study. It's part of the process, so I'm not able to touch on that now. Let me keep going to the Q&A box. A reminder to add the RFI link in the chat. Question regarding the acreage of the area that is wooded on the aerial photo. If you don't mind, Alan, Claire, can I punt this to you? I don't know the exact acreage.
I don't have the exact acreage either. It's substantially less than 110 acres. I'd hate to venture a guess, but it's a substantial amount of space, but I don't have the actual acreage. I can probably get that up and get back to you.
All right, and then going again just through questions. There is a comment. I hope the space is not overdeveloped. It's nice having a large natural space in DC, and hope the Anacostia Coordinating Council is added to the list for community engagement. And yes, we do have the ACC as one of several Ward 8 stakeholders. So I do want to confirm that, as well as HABA. Next question, what would qualify as significant environmental impact or impacts for this site, taking it from an EA to an EIS?
I think I would rather Alan or Claire respond to this one, please.
Sorry, I was trying to look up the other. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What would qualify as significant environmental impact or impacts for this site, taking it from an EA to an EIS?
I think that's a little too soon to say what would actually qualify. I think when we identify a significant impact, then it would be trigger an EIS. But I think the idea is that we would avoid any significant impacts so that we stay at the EA level. That's the intent. And whether we want to try to protect the wetlands and develop open space and community areas consistent with its surroundings, so that we avoid any significant impact. That's the goal. So it's hard to say what would trigger into an EIS at this point.
A rephrasing of the earlier flooding question, how many feet of flooding are you using to guide your assumptions about where to develop across the site? And a note, DOE's Anacostia River Corridor Plan uses 3.4 feet above current high tide by 2080. Frankly, that's probably an underestimate. What is the team using for this site?
Again, we're looking at the site right now as developable parcels. We're considering all these different layers and elements as we're considering how much density, how to mitigate flooding. So we are aware of the requirements. We are basing our development and decisions on that. I'm not sure. I have Alan and Claire on that could potentially speak to that, but I think generally that's really our position. We're still working through all of that.
Is the 295 underpass included as part of the area of development? I know Art to Go hopes to brighten the space through art. Is there a collaboration with the Anacostia bid?
We're hoping so. So it's considered, how do we put it? But adjacent projects are something that we're very excited at supporting. We're aware of the work that they're hoping to do, and we're hopeful that we can be supportive.
Can I add to that, Whit? our office and I specifically have been sitting in on those meetings with the Anacostia bit about the 295 underpass as well. So we are coordinating and hopefully more in an official capacity after we kick this project off, like Whit said.
All right. I'm just checking the last bit of questions here before I go back to the chat box. There's a request for clarification on what would be considered a significant impact here, if you want to add additional clarification.
Sure, it would be an irreversible and irretrievable commitment of resources. So something that could not be mitigated, something that could not be brought back or enhanced, that would completely destroy a particular element.
There's a question regarding community partners. It was mentioned that HABA and Anacostia coordinating council are key partners. Which schools are on that list?
That's why I would
You wanna-
defer to you if that's all right.
Sure. So I know we have Thurgood Marshall and Savoy on the list. There are one or two others, and I apologize, it's not coming to my mind right now, but we do have several schools on the list, and we'll gladly take mentions from you if there are specific ones that you want to make sure are included as part of that outreach effort. I'm going to go back to the chat box. Just give me 1 second to get back to the last set of questions. There's a question around, give me 1 second. Can you discuss the funding plan for the site?
This site has many elements. We have infrastructure, we have the relocation, we have a number of costs, and as we're working through this process, we're considering them, and we're considering how we're going to move that forward. So I can't really answer any questions about that because we're still determining costs. But as we start to and as we start to determine how we're paying for them, that can be made everyone aware. We can make everyone aware.
Give me 1 second. This is a question. I'm sorry. There's another question. Are there plans to make swimming and water use at the site?
We're at a very early stage of determining what the open space and public space will be. I think that is an excellent idea. I think we're at the stage in the process where again we're welcoming these sort of suggestions and comments. So I would just ask again that everyone continue to provide their wish list of things that they feel will serve them and the community, and we'll continue to take that in. And as we start to dig in and start to plan the park and open space, we'll start to incorporate what we can.
Alan, do you want to add a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to get back. So I should have gone with my original guess. The wooded acres is about 41 acres. The wooded area is about 41 acres. I was going to guess 40, but I sold it a little bit short. So to get the answer to that question.
All right, so I'm just going down the list here. Next question, is the intent of the RFI to have any developers for the site to work around an anchor tenant selected through the RFI? Are respondents to the RFI expected to work around anchor tenants or partner with them? And how will things like infrastructure improvements be addressed? Let me know if you need to repeat that.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot being asked there. So yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Is the intent of the RFI to have any developers for the site to work around an anchor tenant selected through the RFI? And or are respondents? Oh yeah, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, let's pause there. The RFEI was for an anchor use. If an anchor use is studied and determined to be part of the site, then that would be a parcel we would consider for disposition for that use, which is what is put into the RFEI. So I would say probably your question and questions might be answered by just reviewing the RFEI.
And I think that addresses the second question that I read. So I'm going to jump to their third question, which was how will things like infrastructure improvements be addressed?
That's something, again, that is not happening now. We don't know what the costs will be. We don't know what infrastructure is required. We're still trying to plan the site. And I think once we have a better sense, we'll be able to answer that question.
Is there an opportunity for ecotourism as part of this plan process?
If that's something the community wants, well, we can explore it, absolutely.
Will a community benefits agreement be executed with 8A or 8F? A and C 8A or A and C 8F?
I believe, don't we overlap here? So it would be, I mean, it would be something where, depending on where the parcel is, I would assume it would be within that portion. But I would have to just reference a map again, just to be sure.
I'll just read a comment. As a resident of W Street and a frequent user of the Anacostia River Walk, an access point on W Street is very exciting. We currently have to cross the intersection of MLK and Marion Barry, which is not safe, especially during rush hour. Give me 1 second. There is one comment, if you want to comment on this, there was just concern expressed around, the statement says, it's hard to believe you have no idea whatsoever of the desired density of development. If you want to just provide a comment on that.
Well, I can't throw out a number, unfortunately. Again, we're citing the site as developable parcels. There's probably a max and min, but you know, we have a process to go through, which is inclusive of input from the community, which is inclusive of understanding the context before we can make a determination of how we're going to develop each parcel. So I would ask for patience there. I understand an interest and a need here, but this is a process, and you know, we really want to make sure it's an equitable one.
And I'm going back over to the Q&A box. Again, I see a number of folks have input additional schools and organizations, so thank you. We will confirm that those are part of our stakeholder list, and if they're not, we will add them. There is another question posed here regarding the site. Given what we've heard about the topography of the site, its location wholly within the 100 to 500 year floodplains, and the anticipated rise in tide levels, stormwater and flood security will be big issues. Considering this in the context of what you said about wetlands and a living shoreline, it seems that there is a lot of potential in the 70 acres set aside for park purposes to be devoted largely to climate resilience by restoring the historic natural connection of the site to the river. Is this in the mix as you consider the design?
Yeah, that was really well put, and frankly, you know, we have a lot of conversations about the site because it's what we live. But that is a consideration. I think it's something that we would have to defer to experts. We'd also have to understand how the community would perceive it. But based off of your comment, it seems like it would be a positive thing, and it is something that would be considered. So we'll continue to investigate and see how that can, you know, work its way into the site.
There is another question. Will equity factor into which ANC should receive a community benefits agreement? And if so, why would 8F be considered over 8A?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. Again, the community benefits agreement is something that would happen at the tail end of the project with the disposition of the parcels. If there's concern about who would be considered, I think it's probably something that we can talk about through this process. But from my understanding and previous experience, it would be what ANC you're falling within. So again, I'm happy for any additional input there because we want to make sure we get it right. So again, we're open to discuss that.
Where should or to whom should people send recommendations or invites for community engagement?
Sorry,
I believe there is an email address on the Poplar Point website page. Yes. So on the Poplar Point website page, and we will put that back in the chat box. If you go to that site, there is an email address and a sign up form. All communication can be directed there. And that will get to the project team to add any additional context. And again, that has been added to the chat box. You can easily access the project website and communicate with us that way. All right. I want to give it one more minute. If there are any remaining questions, we went through quite a few. And again, all of these questions and responses will be posted along with the presentation recording. And obviously any questions that could not be addressed tonight that need to be addressed later in the process will be addressed as we move throughout the process together. But please know that we've captured all of your questions and comments. I'm going to give it 30 more seconds in case there's any other burning question before we bring our closing slide up to make sure that you also know how to participate in the public comment period before we wrap up this evening. All right, I'm checking to make sure I've not missed anything. Okay. Naomi, if I can ask you to bring our slideshow back up. Thank you. So after this meeting, how can you submit comments? So again, we're going to direct everyone to the public input site. Link is in the chat box. It's also here on the slide. publicinput.com/Poplar Point. Again, publicinput.com/Poplar Point. There is an online comment period open as we kick off the EA process. You can submit comments online. When you go to the Poplar Point website, you will see a link to get to the Pepsi site on NPS. And you can follow that site to leave specific comments around the EA. If you wish to provide written comments, you can mail those comments to Tammy, who is on the call tonight. And the address where those mailed comments can be sent is here on the screen. Please note, if you are going to mail comments, those comments must be postmarked by February 28th. Online comments are going to be taken for the EA process through February 28th. Again, thank you so much for your time this evening and for your questions and for your participation. Again, this was just the kickoff for this evening for the next year plus of a very long, very intensive process in working with all of you. So we appreciate your time, your interest. Please know that there is more coming, particularly around engagement. And so we look forward to connecting with all of you as we move forward into this process. Again, please check the website for more updates, as well as the recap from tonight's meeting. And have a great rest of your evening. And thank you again. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you all. Good night.